Well, guys, the World MMA Awards dubbed Israel Adesanya the Fighter of the Year for the second year in a row. We're talking about that decision and did they get it right now. What's up, Barnhill family? Welcome back to the channel.
Yo.
Happy New Year, guys. We hope 2021 brings you much happiness, success, and yes, of course, some great fights.
Absolutely.
So, Nick, for the second year in a row, Israel Adesanya has been dubbed by the World MMA Awards as the Fighter of the Year. Yep. He was in 2008 was the Breakout Fighter of the Year. So he's racking up awards right now. Year after year, he's winning something. Also won International Fighter of the Year. No surprise there. So my question is, do you think they got this right? I mean, he had a great knockout of Paulo Costa back in September, and then he defeated Yoel Romero by decision in March. 2 marquee wins in 2020. Was it enough for you to give him your Fighter of the Year in 2020?
Well, he was definitely one of the candidates up there. You know, the Deiveson Figueiredos, the Kevin Hollands, the Khamzat Chimaevs. Those were kind of the guys that everybody was talking about. And the reason Izzy kind of flew under the radar for me, and I think a lot of other people, is because when the pandemic started and the fights kind of took a turn and everybody took a break in March, it felt like the fights that took place in the early parts of the year in January and February got lumped into 2019, and then everything after the shutdown started kind of felt like 2020, and that was the fight year, the calendar year for 2020. So that's why I even thought that the Yoel fight was like a fight from last year. So
right,
with my first thought being like, oh, he only fought once. Paulo Costa, flawless performance, maybe the toughest opponent of any of the candidates, at least on paper. That's what we thought. 2 undefeated fighters fighting for a title, which was the first. That was the first time that had happened in a long time. So there was a lot on that fight, and he kind of made easy work of Paulo Costa. But then when you have to lump in the Yoel Romero fight in there as well, I see how strength of schedule played a part in them choosing Izzy.
Yeah, you know, the Yoel Romero, if I'm not mistaken, was UFC 248 on March the 7th. So that should have probably been, I have to go back and look at the schedule, but that should have probably been the last, certainly the last big fight card, but possibly even the last fight card they did before the shutdown, because everything kind of happened in late March, early April, and then, you know, we had that month layoff, and then boom, the Jacksonville fights came to be. So yeah, it is weird because when you think about some of the great fights in 2020, you know, Conor McGregor, you know, his amazing performance, not that that was a great fight, but his amazing performance against Cowboy, that was in 2020. You know, and the Romero versus Izzy fight was also in 2020. Although that fight kind of did fall flat and it didn't live up to a lot of people's expectations, to say you beat Yoel Romero when the UFC organization wasn't even asking you to fight him. Izzy wanted that fight, if you recall. He actually said to the matchmakers, guys, Yoel Romero is a guy I want to fight. Costa's still recovering from his injury. I want the biggest names, and I want to put, when my career is over, I want there to be no shadow of a doubt that I am the best mixed martial artist to ever do it. And in order to do that, I need to beat Yoel Romero, which I thought was a really cool thing for Izzy to do, to step up there and fight Romero when nobody was asking him to. And quite frankly, everybody else in the UFC, if you believe what Dana White has to say, wants to fight Romero.
Yeah, that's the way it seemed. Romero has been the kind of like one of the boogeymen in the middleweight division for a long time, and everybody, you know, they will fight him if the time comes and they get like a main event or co-main event opportunity. But for Izzy to go out of his way to fight a guy who had just come off a loss, and it was a great fight, but he did come off that loss to Paulo Costa, just to stay active, I think that definitely won him some points as far as this Fighter of the Year nomination went. And, you know, I think some of the blemishes that happened with Deiveson Figueiredo, and then if Khamzat Chimaev was able to get a 4th fight at the end of the year against Leon Edwards, that might have catapulted him past Izzy. Kevin Holland did something that almost, you know, is unheard of. 5-0. It looked great in all of his bouts, but they were against lesser opponents than, of course, Izzy's 2 opponents. So I think they got it right. I think there's something really special about Izzy Adesanya. The fact that he won 2 years in a row, and he's kind of just taken all these awards, these big awards too. He's not just stealing little ones, but doing some really cool things in the sport. I think they got it right.
Yeah, and it'll certainly be interesting to see because 2021 is setting up well for him. He's got a mega fight with Jan Blachowicz. I think they've announced that for March 6th officially now.
Yeah.
So, depending on how that goes and what the rest of 2021 looks like for him, 2020 he might three-peat, as they say.
Yeah.
But I'm going to disagree with you here. Izzy Adesanya had a wonderful year. I think that he beat the most difficult opposition of any champion this year. He's not my fighter of the year. As you said, when you look at 2020, it's almost like two seasons. It's the pre-shutdown and the post-shutdown. And my 2020 fighter of the year is Kevin Holland. He had 5 fights starting on May 16th in 2020. So literally you're talking about the 5th month of the year. So 5 fights in 7 months, all of them victories, 4 of them knockouts. Knocked out Joaquin Buckley, the guy that everybody is saying had the knockout of the year. The guy who had the knockout of the year got knocked out by Holland.
Yeah, with a crisp, basic 1-2, but it was a great knockout.
Yeah, and I understand completely that the strength of schedule plays a major factor here. And if he hadn't gotten that marquee knockout of Jacare Souza in December, he would not be my fighter of the year. But Jacare Souza, I don't care how old he is, he's still a tough contender. He's still a tough night out for anybody, and any fighter, if they get matched with him, is taking that fight quite seriously. I was very impressed. That fight was what did it for me. That was what pushed Kevin Holland over the edge and made him my fighter of the year in 2020. Not just that he won, but the fact that he was shooting submission attempts on Jacare Souza, possibly the best jiu-jitsu player to ever compete in the UFC.
Yeah.
He didn't get any of those submissions, nor did I expect him to, but the fact that he was active from the ground, from his back, throwing up triangles, and then ultimately got a knockout from the most unconventional of places, literally being from like an open guarded position to throw that shot that literally was the beginning of the end and just flatline Jacare after that. I think it was, and the recency bias plays a factor in here too. That was an absolute statement at the end of the year by Kevin Holland, a guy that was a Dana White Contender Series reject. He did not get the contract. Dana didn't care for his personality. And the fact that he got a second chance, made the absolute best of it, and has now become one of the most talked about people in the sports, are all of the reasons why Kevin Holland slightly edges out Israel Adesanya in my eyes for 2020 Fighter of the Year.
Yeah, and I think Kevin Holland is a great choice. He was definitely one of my top choices, especially when I thought Izzy's fight with Yoel was in 2019, so I was way out. But I think I could easily say that if Deiveson Figueiredo never missed weight and that fight against Brandon Moreno wasn't a draw, there's no conversation. 4 title fights, all wins, all finishes. If we could, besides the Brandon Moreno fight, but he was in the hospital the night before that one. So if he could have overcome all of that, won those 2 fights and beat the scale more importantly, then we'd have him as the fighter of the year. Kevin Holland did some things that were amazing. I have to say, I'm not sure if he's listed as knockout of the year, but Joaquin Buckley will win that. I think they got the right guy with that one. But Kevin Holland's knockout over Jacare Souza, in my opinion, is the next best knockout of the year. I think another nomination he should deserve, and it goes between him and Deiveson Figueiredo again, is most brutal finish. And maybe like the scariest image of 2020 goes to Figueiredo when he was choking out Joseph Benavidez, that when he was asleep and like you saw the eyes roll behind the back of his head. That was frightening.
Yeah.
But Kevin Holland standing over Jacare Souza, landing those last few ground and pound punches as Jacare was like folded over and unconscious, that was also one of the scariest moments. And like that's something that if I was Kevin Holland, I would frame that and put it in my house because that's a crazy moment. I think big things are coming for Kevin Holland. It's one of those funny things where it's if you have somebody like Dana White and he doesn't like you at all, then there's a chance that you might be able to change his mind. If he doesn't think about you at all, then you're never going to change. You're never going to get into his mind. But Kevin Holland made such a bad first impression that now he's all that Dana White's talking about. So it's like the thing. It's like hate isn't the opposite of love. Indifference is the opposite of love. And I think Kevin Holland, is one of Dana's favorite fighters now.
That's a really good point because they were calling him big mouth and saying that he talked too much. But, what's worse than being talked about negatively, not being talked about at all.
Right.
And so Kevin Holland, and kudos to him because Dana White said, listen, nobody will step up and fight Santos. And Kevin Holland's like, yeah, I got my ass kicked in that fight. But saying yes and saying, yeah, I will do it, no questions asked, is what got him back in the good graces of the boss. And then what he's been able to do thereafter has just been masterful. And he's a beautiful example of what we talk about all the time. If you're an up and coming fighter and you want to get your name out there, pick up the phone and say yes and do it often. And Khamzat Chimaev was on the fast track to being fighter of the year. And obviously what happened on December 19th for the December 19th fight wasn't in his control. Obviously Leon Edwards tested positive for COVID, so he wasn't able to finish out the year strong. Had he gone out there and just starched Leon like many believe that he's going to eventually, maybe we would be talking about him being fighter of the year. But these guys you're talking about two guys who were relative unknowns, not even in the beginning of 2020, but summer of 2020 were relative unknowns. And now they're the two fighters everybody's talking about. It really shows you what works in this sport today. Yeah. And Deiveson was a guy who was on my list. I think that if he had won and knocked out Moreno or even gotten any type of finish, that he would have been my guy. But the fact that it was a draw and then the fact that he missed weight against Benavidez did put him behind Izzy and behind Holland in my book, at least.
Yeah. Me too. And if we're giving out third place, I think it goes to Figueiredo because Khamzat was able to win 3 fights, very impressive, in 2 weight classes, and took 2 punches the entire time in the 6 minutes of fighting that he had. But the strength of schedule wasn't there, and he didn't get to finish the year as strong as he came out in the middle of the year. So I think I'm going to go ahead and bet that Khamzat Chimaev will be a fighter of the year at some point in his life. It just wasn't this year. Yeah.
Well, for me, Holland wouldn't have been it if it wasn't for the Jacare win.
Yeah.
Khamzat was missing the marquee win. He was missing that top 5, top 10 guy that everybody thought was a real. It's like, okay, this is the guy that's going to determine whether this guy's the truth or whether he's all hype.
Right.
And Jacare was that guy for Holland, and Leon Edwards would have been that guy for Khamzat.
Yeah.
Now they're saying that fight might not even happen anymore. Just kind of as a side note, Khamzat is now pulled out, and I'm hearing at first it was undisclosed reasons, and now they're saying that it's some type of hand injury or finger injury for Khamzat.
More news came out ever since you read those articles. It appears he's got some lung issues and may have tested positive for COVID.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. So it's a coronavirus related, and he's not able to train because he has no energy, and his lungs aren't operating how they need to. So I understand that. Hopefully he gets better. And Dana also said in an interview yesterday that he is going to try to keep that fight packaged up and move it to a later date. And he's not going to let Leon fight on January 20th. He's going to try to bottle that whole fight up. And so I do hope that fight happens because it seems like a good matchup. Now we're interested in seeing it. And the worst thing the UFC does is they give us a great fight, and then for whatever reason it falls out, and then they just scrap it when it was like a dream matchup. It was like Tony Ferguson, Khabib. Like they kept having to scrap it, and I'm just like, oh man, just give us the fight already. But
no question. And I can tell you, having recently overcome the coronavirus, I don't believe that Khamzat's a person to make up an injury or he's the kind of guy who's he's chomping at the bit to get in there. But I didn't get very sick. I felt a little under the weather for 36 hours, but the only thing that's been lagging has been my energy levels. Even several weeks later, I do feel like my cardio when we train is like 75% at best, and it's harder to take a deep breath than it was before. So there are some lingering effects. There's even discussion that Cody Garbrandt has had a hard time recovering, not from the sense of being actually physically sick, but his lung capacity and his cardio is not where it was, and that is kind of a lingering thing. And it's going to be interesting with this, because most of these athletes, for all intents and purposes, are extraordinarily healthy people. They're not going to get the brunt of the COVID high fevers, extreme conditions that lead to hospitalizations, things like that, where they're going to find, their real issues with COVID is after they've recovered, are they suffering any type of cardiovascular output or lack thereof and any type of lung capacity situations. I think that's going to be the thing to watch in 2021 with some of these guys, because most of them are going to recover from the virus itself, at least the immediate symptoms of it. But yeah, that it's so I hope that they keep that Khamzat Leon fight. And had that happened in 2019, or sorry, had that happened on December 19th in 2020, and it'd been a spectacular win for Khamzat, it would have been between him and Kevin for me. But honestly, probably still I would have gone with Kevin. I mean, 5 fights since May, when you were a guy who Dana White said he wasn't interested in not that long ago. I mean, and you knocked out the guy that had the sickest knockout I've ever seen, and Joaquin Buckley. It's hard not to give it to him.
And one of the best grapplers the sport's ever seen in Jacare Souza. You know, when we talk about Kevin Holland, and this is why he's such a strong case for the Fighter of the Year, I think that if they didn't go with Izzy, they had to go with Kevin Holland. When it comes down to the punches and the kicks, he deserves it. When it comes down to the win, the schedule, all that stuff, he deserves it. But he's also doing things right in the sport that a lot of people aren't. And luckily, the people that were in that conversation with him for Fighter of the Year all do have the perfect, the complete package when it comes to presenting themselves as a character. Izzy is a great character for the sport. Deiveson Figueiredo, even though he can't speak English, is a great character for the sport. Khamzat Chimaev, he's got that very scary Russian style of, but he's spewing with confidence.
Yeah.
And when he speaks, he speaks the truth. It may sound a little cocky, but it's not. It's just this weird, scary confidence. So all of them have that aspect of the triple threat or whatever. Be able to fight, be able to promote fights, and be able to sell fights. Those types of things are very important. And Kevin Holland, he's just such a natural entertainer, such an interesting guy, such a funny guy that I think there's a lot that they can do with Kevin Holland moving forward. And if he stays as active in 2021 as he did in 2020, we might see him fight 11 times next year. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the schedule is going to get much more difficult for him, and we might see him in there about 4 times, but Dana White knows he can rely on him, and I think he knows he can make 170 and 185, prefers 185, but he lives at 190, so it's not a big weight cut for him. On short notice, he can fly to Vegas. He said he's not really into going to Dubai or Abu Dhabi. He doesn't think there's a reason to fight out there just to take a flight. So send him to Vegas anytime they need a fight, and I think we're going to see a very active, very impressive Kevin Holland in 2021.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, guys, let us know in the comments. Nick picked Izzy just because of simple strength of schedule. You have Costa, Romero. It's hard to argue that. However, I went with the guy who fought 5 times since May, Kevin Holland. He's my Fighter of the Year. That knockout of Jacare sealed it for me. Let us know in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Nick? Or do you have somebody else in mind altogether? Let us know, guys, and thanks as always. Please check us out on audio where you listen to podcasts. Like, comment, and subscribe. And here is to a wonderful 2021.
Yeah, see you in the next one. Peace.
Have a good day.